So we were just touching on the idea of touching on some of the speculation and different things that are going on around the planet and what people think they're discovering about this coronavirus, otherwise known as COVID-19. I noticed that one of Trump's, Kelly Conway, she calls it the 19th version of coronavirus, when in fact, let's see, how does it go? What was the actual? She said there were 19 versions of it, and I think it was actually discovered in 2019. Yeah,
It
because
was
this is early 2020, and it was originally identified in December, I think.
correct. The 19 refers to the year of discovery.
So there's a lot of information out there that is not accurate, a lot of speculation. I find a couple of doctors that I'm paying attention to that I find to be quite interesting. And then we've got some of the wild stuff, like some of the links you sent me. Why don't you touch on what drew your interest to that, and where you're kind of at with all that, if you would, just for a start.
Just for a start, well, I'm the main link, or some of the links that I've been sort of looking at, and they've been sort of sent to me by other people. And I'm always ready to be open, especially when there is such uncertainty, even from possible inaccurate or misinformation from government or from formal sources. And before I leap into the speculation, there has been certainly in Canada some criticism of WHO, regarding the type of information it's been giving, excuse me, and also the fact that its initial reports as obtained from China, some critics, some sources would say that this information was not entirely accurate, nor was it entirely, if you like, thorough. And because of that, some criticism is coming out now as to how the virus actually originated, whether in fact the Chinese were covering up something, whether or not there's collusion on the part of other countries. This is what we're referring to when we're talking about speculating. Now, if you take this further, there are probably two big speculative theories that people might identify as conspiracy theories. One is the fact that the virus has been manipulated and willfully generated in order to, if you like, monitor, direct, and eventually reorganize the powers that be, the very top of the powers that be, in a position of strength and a position of control over the population.
So you're saying intentionally leaked? Is that the point you're making? I
That
know it's probably manufactured.
Yeah, the fact that instead of being a natural virus, the virus in fact has been created, developed, and has been intentionally leaked in various areas of the world. So if you want to talk about Italy, you want to talk about Iran, excuse me, or Spain, and of course China, there are those that are saying that there were willful leaking of the virus. That's one conspiracy theory, and I'm not suggesting that it is or it isn't.
Right.
I'm simply talking. I'm merely observing and describing at this point. The second is the fact that the virus is tied to 5G, the latest what would you call it, iteration of electronic magnetic emission. In other words, the latest technology known as 5G is now literally coincidentally rolling out at the same time, a lot of it, as this virus is taking place. And again, there is speculation that the 5G, that there are health effects of it that have not been thoroughly researched or reported on, that in fact the electromagnetic waves interfere with the body's own natural electromagnetic composition. And in fact, the 5G is creating chaos in the system, the human system, and that some are calling the coronavirus as being tied to the release of 5G technology. Now, we have centers in Canada where rollout is occurring on a, I would say, a fairly minor basis. It's not extensive, but it has been said, for instance, that Wuhan is a major 5G center. In fact, most of the, if you like, piloting of this technology has occurred in Wuhan. And in having looked at some of the other countries like Italy, especially, 5G is a fairly, it's already making its inroad in that particular country, specifically in Milan. And just thinking of Trieste, not Trieste, but there's another city that I'm sorry, I missed the name of it right now, but Milan specifically is another center where 5G is being unrolled. Further to this, I've been reading that the cruise ship that was off of the coast of Japan, what was it called? The Princess, Diamond Princess or something?
Oh, no.
So many hundreds were infected. It actually had as its source 5G technologies, and the government of Japan, realizing this and what occurred there, has prohibited the rollout of 5G in the country until further studies, research is made. So again, some speculate that this is one, it's hand in hand with the other. Others say, oh, this is another conspiracy theory, trying to prevent modernization and the good things about 5G and being an incredible speed of bandwidth, having the breadth and width to accommodate and to, for instance, sustain electric cars, and obviously in any further generations of smartphones, being able to offer all that ease and all that speed and all that readiness that even 4G right now is fine, but it will not have the capacity or the power for these future products and services.
That's a good start. So, and I'm not familiar with the idea of the cruise ship being a 5G signal, particularly with the idea that not a lot of people have 5G phones and things like that. But I suppose if 5G was part of the signal, 4G would still be part of it, and even 3G and whatever, because people have different levels of capacity to take different signals, incoming signals.
Absolutely. I'm not suggesting that it is exclusive. What is happening, if you take a look, and there is a map where you can, for instance, identify or ask where is 5G now operating in the world, and you will get a global report of every single country and every single city center where 5G is making inroads. And of course, you will also find clusters of 3G and 4G. one of the arguments for 5G is the fact that in a country, for instance, such as Canada, there are more remote areas. There are some that have no broadband, that have no Wi-Fi, because the reach is too far. And so again, the argumentation, and I've already been looking at some of our communications organizations such as RTC is our wireless, if you like, organization that is a policymaker and that kind of thing, looking at what they've said. Interestingly enough, nowhere on their website or anywhere else could I find any kind of research or any kind of identification with health issues. I did certainly find, though, all the advantages that 5G offers. And Rogers, which is one of our main providers here in Canada, is the company that is rolling out 5G. And again, on its website, absolutely no mention or concern of any kind of health hazards or possible invasions of the human system.
Well, usually that kind of research wouldn't, I don't think that the cell people would have an obligation to identify those kinds of things because they don't see it as a problem. But there are places where that kind of research is done. And for the most part, I think it's been considered inconclusive. But I can tell you, I don't use my cell phone much anyway. I have a cell phone. It's a Nexus, which is a Google phone, 4 years old now. I just put a new battery in it, took it apart and put a battery in it. But I don't use it for much, and I don't really like cell phones in the first place. But and so I kind of find myself immune to the cell phone issue. In fact, I feel like on a cell phone, I only pick up 3/4 or 7/8 of the conversation, and I don't find that to be sufficient. So if I have any kind of important call, I'm certainly not going to do it when I'm driving. I don't know how people do that. It doesn't add up for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I prefer to be at my desk, and I'm all voice over internet. I have a regular desk phone, but it's voice over internet, and so I kind of stay away from it in general. It's kind of like smart meters. You know, they made a big deal out of that, and I think there are some people that are sensitive to smart meters. There's one on this house. It was here before we got here. But my overall attitude, and I'm not so much playing the devil's advocate, I'm more about my perspective because I'm kind of conservative because I think conspiracy theories are a dime a dozen, and anybody can talk about the problem. Anybody, and then extend it a little bit and add a little bit more to it, and then it gets exciting, and next thing you know, they're trying to get us. And I stay as far away from that as I can, being a
Mm-hmm.
solution-oriented person. I don't buy into conspiracies. I'm sure 9/11, what we think happened is probably what happened. I don't doubt that. And I just saw something about Kennedy being assassinated. I'm sure there's something to all of that, and there's probably something to all this. But my question back to you is, there's suddenly these ships, people got sick on them. Now, does that mean those ships suddenly got 5G from different companies and cruise ships all over the world, independent of each other, all got 5G and then everybody just fell over? I don't think so.
No, I don't know. I'm merely citing one example, and I'm citing uh, Japan as a government that moved the way I described. But whether that is in fact accurate, I don't know, Jim. I'm simply citing various scenarios that are coming up. And as you have said, some of these, as time goes on, are like urban myths. There could be some truth, but we don't know how much. At the same time, uh, I'm doing a little bit of homework again on the 5G aspect, not because there might be some implication with coronavirus, but simply to satisfy my inquiry. Here again in Canada, the last government response to concerns about 5G was in 2016. There are committees, parliamentary committees that are set up, one of which was specifically identified to investigate 5G. And the committee, nonpartisan, did drop recommendations that there were some concerns. And they were asking the government when the government would be acting on moving toward a more thorough investigation. That was back in 2016. Nothing's been done since that. Now, I'm referring only to Canada.
Right.
And so me, if I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, in other words, not as a conspiracy theorist, but simply as a engaged citizen looking to find some answers. So I did write to my MPP, and I did write to my counselor, and I'm looking to see, obviously the government has changed since 2016. So there's an interest on my part to see where this path has gone. And that's simply me speaking as somebody who doesn't know all the answers, but at the same time is looking at least for some credible evidence.
Well, I am not pro 5G because I think this electromagnetic frequency and all of this man-made frequency that we're dumping into the atmosphere that goes through walls. And by the way, one of the problems with 5G is it doesn't go through walls very well. And so they're really having to do a lot of coverage for it to be effective there. But I am not for 5G because there's going to come a point where literally we are going to fry ourselves, and I think we're doing it anyway. And the corporations and all the money behind it will go. It's just like Monsanto will go to all kinds of trouble to protect their Roundup product and this and that. And I'm sure the rollout of these different products have a component of research and profit and skewing it in their favor. And there's going to come a point where this electromagnetic thing is going to become where it really hurts more people than just a few, because we do know there are people that Alexis is sensitive to electromagnetic frequency. I know people that, of course, we don't know how much of it's psychosomatic or what's the term for when people heal without medicine? It's in their mind.
That's right. Or yeah.
But my point is that all of this ultimately is going to have a cost. It probably does on the fringes with some people who are higher sensitivity, because there is such a thing as being higher sensitive. In fact, a lot of people are on overload from being high sensitivity. But does it tie to coronavirus? That's really more the question. And
yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, you finish and then I'll come in.
What I was going to say, when I first read of the 5G effect or the scenario potential of 5G being the problem, the first thing I did was look down a map of Italy and look for where the 5G was. And on the scale of the country, it's almost non-existent. I mean, it's there, it's in 5 or 6 big cities, but it's a speck. If 4G is green and 5G is purple, it hasn't rolled out at all. Now, Wuhan might be different, but Italy, it isn't rolled out at all, in my opinion, even though it is in 4 or 5 cities.
Yeah, and I agree with you. As I said, it's city central. Again, I'm simply stating, not so much an observation, but what I've been reading, so that again, those of you who are interested in a global look at 5G, it's available. I'm not sure what the website is, but if you key in 5G, where 5G is rolling out in globally or where it exists, you're going to get a whole mapping system. And this is a scientific site and they basically do updates almost on a daily basis. What is interesting about 5G, before we leave the topic, is the fact that there will have to be an installation of towers, significant towers for 5G, uh, the reach. And secondly, of course, we haven't spoken about this, but satellites play a big role in how we can perform our technology really well. And you'll notice that the proliferation and the number of satellites has multiplied so much that that too might become, as you've said, Jim, an issue. It might eventually become more than just, oh, we've got a sky full of satellites that are blocking the natural stars. In other words, some scientists have already said that their research is being impacted by the fact that the sky, night sky, is too light. They can't properly discern or measure starlight because of the light of satellites. So there are these kind of things that eventually one overlaps the other. And then, of course, aside from the health issue, you might then, as you're suggesting, have an environmental issue. So things like this bear reflection.
Well, I was just going to look for a picture, but it's a little bit too much trouble to find it. But Elon, I like Elon Musk a lot, but I think he has 1,200 satellites in mind. There's some crazy number for beaming internet to the whole planet. And when I say that concerns me, I wonder how that's done. And every time that a rocket goes up, it releases, I don't think the number is 60 at a time, but it might be. It's somewhere between 12 and 60. In fact, I could find the article without too much trouble. But one of the things I do know from this article is that they deploy them about 200 miles out. I could be wrong on this. They deploy them at a certain range, but they eventually go much farther out. I wonder if it's worth trying to pull up this article. They end up at like 500 miles above the Earth when their function is completed, when they get stabilized in orbit. And but again, all of this electromagnetic is not the same thing as the frequency of the Earth. What they call the Schumann frequency, 7.87. These guys are shooting. The mind of man is just not that smart. We don't think about nature when we do things. And it's governments and corporations whose bottom line is profit, and they push to do their thing with the dollar sign in mind. And until people start falling over too fast, they're going to keep pushing. And it's the idea that 5G is tied to coronavirus in some manner was originally more the question. But I know for a fact, and again, I could pull this up without too much trouble. They know that 5G signal, which is like I don't understand the electrical ratings very well as far as numbers, but they know that it affects hemoglobin in the human system. They know that. And that's measured. And I wish it was easy for me to pull this stuff up. I'd have to look a little bit. But that the 5G does affect the human body, and it affects hemoglobin, and it affects the iron, and this and that, and it throws it a little bit. The question is, how much of this stuff can we stand, or better said, how are we going to get back to normal?
Yes. Well, the fact of the matter is, this virus, and we talked about it as having a silver lining. I think that something like 5G or any other developments that anyone, whether it's you, me, or whoever's listening, is realizing it's of concern to them, then this is the time to engage. The virus in its own way is giving us opportunity and in a way permission due to our quarantine situation to take time not only to reflect as we've talked about, but also to, as I'm saying, to engage if there is a particular issue or a concern or a challenge that you personally are seeing out there that you want to investigate.
Well, nobody's going to take care of the humans better than the humans. The government
Correct.
is an artificial entity. The court system is, it's like the court systems favor Monsanto. They favor, because the government is an artificial entity and the court system is an extension of that, they have a certain favoritism to corporations over the humans, because making rulings favoring corporations is a lot easier than all the complexities of what humans' complaints and problems are. And they just, corporations pretty much have free run. The government's a corporation and they take care of themselves is the point. And it's not really anybody taking care of the humans. You could say, oh, the president does, but he represents this massive corporation and all of the values of it, and he has to manage all of that. And at some point, the humans are going to have to learn how to take care of themselves. And I think that's part of the silver lining of this is, instead of taking yes or no on face value, we take the time to put our nose into things that are important to us and decide, how much of the deal about smart meter. Do you have smart meters up there where you are?
No, I don't
Well,
think so.
the smart meters supposedly talk to each other through the neighborhood somehow. And
No, then we wouldn't have that. I don't think I've ever encountered it. And maybe there might be such a thing in a more in, let's say, in a high tech area, or but I'm not familiar with that, Jim.
well, my point is there was a lot of uproar about that 4 or 5 years ago, but the smart meters are in.
Uh,
And I mean, I'm in a town of 12,000 people, and this house has a smart meter on it. It's digital rather than a little wheel that turns and little numbers that mechanical.
oh, I
But
see. So that's entirely that could be the case here too. I'm
yeah,
sure it's probably the same, but it's this incremental process and what is called progress. I think as we are now, our ability to question progress, because progress takes humankind in a certain direction based on what those who control or have the wherewithal, where they want that progress to go. And if we're not, as humankind, vigilant and doing our own due diligence about some things, then a lot of this so-called progress happens. It's touted as being progress and good for us and beneficial. And yet, in the long run, one finds that there are, in fact, great limitations or great disadvantages that start creeping out or creeping about in time. In time. You witness some of the rollouts of, let's say, various kinds of medications, and some have been disastrous for for people. Uh,
well, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, it's okay, and and a lot of us know of some of these, and so if this has already happened once, twice, or maybe three times, and one is finding that there is a lack of good due diligence and critique of what is coming out, then guess what? This is our opportunity to step up.
What's interesting about artificial entities, corporations, like I think GE I could be wrong on this, is 200 years old. I know that a trust that created by Benjamin Franklin is still running. It's 200 years old. Some of these, my point is, these artificial entity corporations that have as their bottom line profit, they outlive us and their agendas outlive us, and we get rolled back under. The next generation comes along, and unless they were taught about this particular problem, it becomes status quo. And where this generation was fighting it and they have the horsepower to stay, we roll under, we die, and the next generation, again, it's become standard operating procedure. And slowly, the freedoms that we've assumed fade out. And that's one of the fears about this coronavirus, is that it's going to force a situation where everybody has to get a vaccination, which is a lot of people, doctors think it's not a good idea because first off, the virus mutates and on and on and on. But the idea that everybody gets eventually in one long line and has a document that says they can get on a bus, or if you don't have the health card passport, you can't get on the bus. You can't do this. You can't borrow money. You can't, and there's always been a willingness by the government to manage people more closely and more closely. And I think that's the big fear behind this coronavirus, is that it's going to engender more control over the people. And there's a lot of people don't buy vaccinations in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want one at all.
It's interesting that I'm glad you spoke about freedom and the fact that there could be curbs and limitations imposed on the population in the future, simply by way of again, controlling, monitoring, saying that this is in the best interests of the general population. One of the links I sent you, Jim, is about London Real Army, and basically its host, Brian Rose, is a real proponent for freedom of the press. Now, he had David Icke, who's quite an iconoclast, on his show. And there will be some people watching the interview or seeing whomever he has on his shows as being a little too out there. My point here is not the fact that the content is this way or that way. The fact that he maintains that he has the freedom of the press to have these individuals on his show, to be able to interview them, that is his right. Now, actually, Google and Twitter removed him because he was getting too many hits. In other words, he was getting up to 1 million followers on his Twitter page. This is Brian Rose, the host of London Real Army. And he basically came out in a bit of a manifesto and said, we got to do something about this, because nobody should be beholden unto any kind of corporation, as you say, and not be able to express themselves. As it turned out, his removal was rescinded and he was back on, and he saw this as a bit of a victory. And I maintain he and a number of other reporters, doctors, researchers who are starting to unravel a little bit of this kind of strict controlling or strict control to where it could lead, has a lot to do, not so much again with the content or the agreement with a certain conspiracy, but with the freedom of the press. I get to say what I get to say because I am an individual. Whether you agree with me or not is beside the point. My freedom to express is tantamount. And this, again, is what I think the coronavirus as a silver lining is producing, is a reckoning with the fact that we We, the people, have every right to express as we will. Obviously, if it's some profanity or willful abuse or that kind of thing, it enters into a legal territory. But anything that is not manipulative or harming somebody, well, let's go for that freedom of speech.
Well, that's entirely right. It's completely right. Now, Trump, last Friday, what's today? Today's Tuesday. So last Friday, he tweeted to three different, they weren't militia groups, but they were right-wing groups that broke quarantine, and they were gathering in Michigan and Virginia or somewhere in a third country, a third state. And Trump encouraged them to break the quarantine and to not listen to the governors. Now I read an article that said that's insurrection. That is patently illegal to encourage people to disregard the state government when it's a fine line, but I'm not talking about whether they have the right to assemble, if you will. But Trump is abusing his capacity to encourage lawlessness. And you have to look at where's that fine line between, in other words, if it hurts somebody else, and that always has to be measured, if it hurts somebody else, I agree completely that we absolutely have a right to free speech. It's a fundamental concept. We have a fundamental right to religious beliefs and this and that, and it's foundational to humans expressing themselves. It's what humans do, is express themselves, and that the government could censor that or control what you can say is a huge problem. And I think you're right. This whole coronavirus is bringing out something. First off, there's a breakdown in society. Everybody's taken some time off. I was out on Sunday. In fact, I've really never paid that much attention to the quarantine. We don't go to the grocery stores and things like that, but otherwise we do our drives and we don't go to the restaurants. They're not open, so we're not doing anything silly. But it was surprising how many people were out this last Sunday in Sedona. I mean, the roads were busy. And I thought maybe the governor had changed his mind about something. Not that I pay attention to that, but everybody's starting to come back out. And again, that's freedom. And I kind of think that's okay. I know it's okay. But the point is that humans need to be able to express themselves, and being censored or by the government or these big corporations is plain wrong.
Yeah, because we have this massive pause, I really feel that a lot of us have the opportunity to reflect, self-reflect. And again, others may find there's no need to do anything or to be anything. And we are all individuals. So each of us has our own unique response, or will have our own unique response to this in this situation, unprecedented. What is wonderful for me to be able to say, though, is for all of us here, we are uniquely here now. And I do feel that there is purpose behind each individual being in this day and age here now. There is something to it, that you are here in the flesh and you are living your life right now in this incredible, extraordinary time. And that, in one way, that in itself is almost mind-boggling, in the sense that we are one of billions of people, yet somehow we got to be here now. And I'd like to think of that as almost special, because there may be something in each of us that is a trigger that actually does come about to improve our own situation, our community, and for some of us, humanity as a whole.
Well, the human beings need to speak up. I mean, that we're in this particular time, everybody's kind of called upon to make choices. It could be to sit back and watch. It could be to become clear about what's important to you and make that statement. Um, there's a lot of learning and listening going on right now. Um, I think everybody should have an opinion, and in expressing their opinion, they kind of compare it to the feedback that comes back. In other words, they have an opinion and it generates a lot of, or maybe it caters to a lot of angry people. They go, okay, is that really the kind of influence I want to have? So yeah, ultimately, it's all about the influence we have and the influence we want to have, and maybe what we'd like to see in the world so that we start acting that way and speaking that way and becoming influential that way. And I think that's part of the silver lining is we've all taken a break, and people are just starting. Where I am, people are just starting to come back out. We were out yesterday. Yesterday was Monday, so we were out. We did a big drive on Sunday. A lot of cars. We even had some traffic backed up in Sedona. We saw restaurants. I don't know how the restaurants could be open other than for takeout, but there were people really milling around, and the parking lots were full. And yesterday we saw a similar thing. We went to the mailbox maybe at 5 o'clock, and it's surprising how many people are on the road. And what they're doing is they're asserting themselves. And hopefully they're doing it for the right reasons. Maybe they want fresh air and they want to feel good, or they could be, just being like some people are being aggressive about expressing themselves, which is unnecessary. But it's an interesting time we're in.
Yeah, certainly we here are being encouraged to go out and get fresh air and exercise, albeit with the social distancing. What is also coming out is there is certainly in our province, they're bringing out programs for people who are starting to have difficulties, psychological difficulties with being quarantined. So there is a mental health concern that is being raised. And that's only come out this past week, where it is being seen that perhaps there may be, and again, there may be repercussions to the longevity of the quarantine. Certainly, some provinces, our leveling effect is starting to happen. And there are various provinces that are already wanting to open up. They do want to decrease some of the restrictions. It remains to be seen. Certainly, the federal government is saying that it'll be a whole federal effort that will control the easing, not necessarily a province by province one, as it may be the case in the States, where a state itself can decide whether it wants to, let's say, open up shops or not.
Well, in the USA, it's a state driven. Trump doesn't have the authority to lift a quarantine. He has the kind of authorities he has. He has certain controls over the state which are properly not proper, which technically aren't proper. But all the feds got into the states like it never. Because as one of the state governors, as the governor of New York pointed out, the states were here before the federal government. The federal government doesn't tell the states what to do. And that's completely right.
Uh,
But
well, it will be. Sorry, go ahead. It will be interesting to see what happens here in Canada. We don't have obviously as many provinces as you have states, but of the provinces, that's an interesting dialogue. So you see here that even the coronavirus may have a profound effect on governance and on the political infrastructure, which again, if there is a dismantling, again, it might be a good thing, or a revisiting of how some policies are conducted.
um, Let me, we touched on this about rights and freedom and this and that. And I got to call Akita in 10 minutes. My 4 o'clock alarm for when we're on different time zones.
Yeah, okay, we got 10 minutes. What do you want to say?
Well, I want to touch on, it happens to be right in front of me. I wrote this about 5 o'clock this morning. In fact, it's a black Word document page with white text because when I'm up, when I'm up at night late, I don't want all that white pages in my face. So my browsers are black. My screen has a lot of black. This document is black with white text. But let me tell you what I wrote. The all-important difference between the fundamental concepts of church and state. I don't think, now this is an American thing. I don't really know how other governments, other countries operate. But in America, there's a very distinct difference between church and state, and nobody has any idea what that means. So two bodies of law, church and state. The state represents the creator. Now, the state means anything that has to do with government. When you say state, you could be talking at a federal level. You could be talking at a state level. You're talking about the state. They issue edicts. They issue laws. And so the state technically is a creator of artificial entities of which corporations and persons are its essential audience. In other words, the state creates artificial entities through the Corporation Commission and this and that. But the church represents the natural creator, the laws of nature and creation itself, of which the human beings are the audience. Human beings have inadvertently come under the guise and the authority of the state, and it's incorrect. The state has tricked human beings into identifying themselves as residents. Oh, yeah, sure, I'm a resident. Of course, I'm a resident. But when you understand the definition of resident, they're not. And what's happened is the humans have undermined their very nature by inadvertently finding themselves under the jurisdiction of the state, which actually has charge over artificial entities and corporations, and all of the laws they produce are over artificial entities, corporations, etc. And the church is the authority that humans are bound by. Now, churches may not be doing a very good job right now, but it's the big division in law is artificial entities and humans, and they don't abide by the same rules. And right now, the humans are tricked into operating under the same rules as artificial entities. And it's one of these things that we have to, for humans to come back to really have their power, they need to understand who they are in relationship to the law. And they may discover they are, quote unquote, non-resident, not subject to the jurisdiction of this administrative law, but they're subject to a different kind of law, the laws of nature, which you read in history, the Declaration of Independence and this and that. They talk about the laws of nature, and the signers of the deck, they understood all this stuff. And they told us over a period of time we were going to lose these fundamental rights, which over a period of generations were down here to heading toward the last straw as far as personal freedom.
Well, certainly there's a separation of church and state in Canada as well. What the legal ramifications are, I don't know, but I would imagine that there is a comparable situation that, or maybe, no, I shouldn't say that. I don't know. Shouldn't.
Well, in the beginning, first off, back in the Crusades and back in the 12 and 1300s and whatever, it was always the king competing with the church for power.
Of course, yes.
So the king represents the state, if you will, and the state represents a certain kind of control, and the church represents a different kind of control.
Correct.
And technically, the humans belong to the governance of the church. And It's actually called ecclesiastical law. That's a part of the definition of, or part of the understanding of it. I mean, the Ten Commandments was part of that. Uh, or the idea of the Ten Commandments was part of that. And the other
Well,
part,
I'm now when I think of it, I mean, when we think of some refugee situations in Canada where they seek um, solace or sanctuary in a church, then they cannot be held, they cannot be accessed. So I imagine that the same kind of uh, letter of the law exists in Canada. It's following more of the British tradition, but obviously, now when I think of it, if you have that kind of sanctuary available in a church where someone can, if someone is being accused and the church is protecting that particular individual for, for maybe hopefully the right reasons, then that individual can gain asylum in the church physically, literally, so that they are not arrested.
so it's an immunity. And what it really boils down to is two, you hear Meghan and Harry, they talk about from the UK and breaking away. And they very clearly talked about the authority of the royals and that jurisdiction. I said authority. So jurisdiction and authority are the same thing. And they dropped, or they were, it had to do with the different seals they could use and this and that. And they couldn't continue to use some of these royal.
Yeah,
Um,
they were wanting to brand themselves using the word royal in their branding for their new foundation, philanthropic foundation, and once they moved to North America, and that was probably one of the stipulations they had to drop. As I agree, in order to be able to move without any rancor from the royal family.
Well, so, and it wasn't even an agreement. It was a fact that when they were under the jurisdiction of the crown, they had certain authorities and obligations and certain privileges. But when they left that, they left some of those things behind, including titles. And so when
Correct.
certain titles belong to that jurisdiction, it was a perfect example of identifying how jurisdiction works. They went from the jurisdiction of the crown or the royal to the public world, and they didn't get to keep the authorities and privileges they had. And so the church and state are the same thing. And ultimately, the humans need to learn how to identify themselves with the right jurisdiction for which the laws are. I think you're not going to find pharmaceutical companies on the same side of the fence as the church. You're going to find natural remedies. You're going to find natural healing. That's where this world belongs. Is whether the church is doing a good job or not, I would say probably not. But I don't follow it very closely. But I know that the humans, where their sanctuary is as humans, and their ability to maintain their rights and their freedoms would be found and protected under the guise of the church, because the state can't get to them when they belong to the church, just like you pointed out.
Yeah, it's an interesting dialogue. It'd be worth looking into. But certainly, again, the traditional structure of the church, as it is, may have been trying to take on some of the same characteristics as a corporate entity, and I think that's where the modern church has has had difficulties. It's in a way become a hybrid and not its natural self. And in that respect, is another institution that is losing favor and is crumbling.
Well,
Anyway,
so that's what happens is these institutions and these ideas kind of morph or fail or whatever they do over a period of generations if the next generation doesn't understand the difference. And part of our point is right now is a time to have an opinion. Right now is a time to speak up. Right now is a time to express your potential, or you may not ever get to, or your kids may not ever get to, because this coronavirus has put everybody in a certain kind of a lockdown. I don't like the term quarantine. And luckily, I don't think that a single virus or a single inoculation or vaccine is going to be a solution. But they're going to probably try to have some kind of papers for you to travel from point A to B at some point in the future, unless we learn how to manage this on our own. We don't need artificial entities telling us what we can do and not do.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay.
So our meetup works. Our Google Meet recording works.
It works. Good.